Hey, it's me, Shane, from Gemini Garage, and usually you find me doing amateur radio, automotive, or home improvement videos, but today I'm going to do a guitar video. Guitar's been a big part of my life, as well as all the other things that I do videos on, so I figured why not. And these kind of ended up being an accidental rabbit hole. Like a lot of things that I end up doing, you go to test something or go to buy something, and then you realize there's a whole bunch of them, and it just kind of went down a rabbit hole. Before I ever got either one of these, I ordered one, and then it got back ordered. They had one left, it was damaged, and they weren't going to ship it, so they refunded my money. And then I ended up getting the black one, and then because I was so pleased with it, I decided to try this one here. And this one had a few issues, but nothing major. But then a really good deal popped up on that one, and I kind of had it in my head of a project that I wanted to kind of use that one for. So that's just sort of the little rabbit hole that landed me all three of these things here. I'm going to kind of take this video into 4 different sections after the intro here. The first part is going to be comparing these to Gibsons, and just kind of going to go over a few things to try and help you distinguish the differences between these and the Gibsons. There's tons of videos out there on that subject, so I'm not going to go real heavy into that because there's a lot of better videos out there. I just kind of want to gloss over a little bit. Then we're going to go into the politics of it, kind of the Chibson-Gibson debate, and kind of whether you should buy these or you shouldn't. Going to do that in part 2. Part 3 is going to be pretty much a complete teardown and checking all these things out and comparing them to each other and see what we got. And then part 4, I'm just going to come back and give my comments and my opinions, and we'll wrap it up. So hopefully you'll find it entertaining. Hopefully you'll learn something, and let's get with it. Okay, so like I said, this is kind of going to be a part 1 here. I'm going to kind of go over what a modern day Chibson, at least one purchased in the last few months, what one of these has in common or doesn't have in common with an actual Gibson. I should preface this by saying that there have been so many clones and copies of this type of guitar, not just recently over the last 10 years or so with the Chinese imports, but even before then. So there's no way, the information I'm giving you is just kind of about these guitars. There's no way to, I mean, you'd have to have just a separate video on how to try and detect a Gibson clone. And there are probably some, I mean, let's face it, Gibson's is an American company. There are probably a couple of guys that work there here and there that, were knocking a couple of extra ones out for their buddies on the weekends, and so they're floating around out there. So I'm sure I'm sure these things run the total gamut from A to Z with copies, clones, and everything else. So having said that, also I should say the information here, I'm going to try and kind of give it to you in a way that you might pass up a real Gibson, but you probably will never end up buying a fake one. And what that means is there may be some things about some real Gibsons that kind of look like they might be fake, or they look like they're off enough that it might be, a copy of some kind. But that's not always the case. Gibson had plenty of people working for it over the years, and human beings are human beings. They had lots of quality control issues here and there too. So I guess the point is some Gibsons can have enough quality control issues and have enough, maybe have been redone here and there. They can have enough things going on with them that you might think that it's a fake. But better to think it's a fake, than to actually buy a fake. So with that, I'm going to move the camera up here. We're going to zoom in on this thing a little bit, and I'm kind of going to try and go over some of the differences. Like I said, I'm not going to do a massive deep dive on this because there's a ton of videos out there on this. And there's so many variations in years. Like I said, they've been making these things for at least 10 years, in this ballpark of being like this. So, and there's been changes over the years, and so it's hard to cover absolutely everything. But I'm going to just kind of go over the few key points. And also at the end of this video in the description, I'm going to put links to as many different Gibson, Chibson videos on the subject as I can find. So let me move the camera here. Okay, so let's see, where should I start? I guess first and foremost, the headstock. These things, when they come, at least mine, they all came with a sticker over the Gibson thing there. So, you know, if it has a sticker on it or a sticker on the back of it, you know, it's probably not real if there's a sticker somewhere around it. The open book or mustache, is it sometimes called, on the headstock here. That used to be kind of a telltale, but it's not so much anymore. And even with Gibsons, sometimes these arches are a little bit deeper, sometimes they're a little bit shallower. Honestly, I'm not even sure how they trademark that, because, you know, if you raise it enough one way or dip it enough the other way, it's going to look different, but I would imagine they've got some way of measuring that, because I'll get into that later. Anyways, so it used to be you could kind of tell by looking at the headstock there, but not so much anymore with that. On the back, the serial numbers, they're always nicely etched in. And then you got the Made in USA, and you can tell it's really not pressed in at all. That USA almost looks like it's kind of lasered in there. I think on a lot of these newer ones, they are lasering them in there, maybe on the Gibsons and the copies too. Not sure on that. I will try and do some research on that and run a ticker across the screen here and let you know what the deal with that is. And then the serial numbers, while there's the serial numbers on all of them, I'm not sure, you know, I believe there's a way to look all those up, and they should probably return to something that's probably not what you're actually looking at. So there's that. So again, and the Gibsons, the serial number, it used to be like pressed in, and so you could kind of, it just looked more like a pressed in, smushed in kind of a serial number, as opposed to these, it just looks like it's kind of routed out or lasered out. So that's one way that, a real popular way that you can still kind of tell. The other way is that most Gibson Les Pauls, especially standards, or excuse me, especially the customs and everything else with all the binding and everything, they always have the binding that goes over the ends of the frets. So when you look at this, you just see binding and then maybe some little bumps where the frets are coming out. Now, the exception to that would be a Gibson that's maybe been refretted or had some work done to the fretboard. Maybe the neck cracked and they redid it and took the binding off and redid it. Anyways, so, and that's one of those things, like I said, where typically speaking you could say, well, all Gibsons have the binding going over the frets, but there is that time here and there where maybe they don't. And that's where you could look at it and go, well, it doesn't have the binding going over the frets, and you might pass on it, and it's a real one. But like I said, better to accidentally pass, you know, on some sketchy real ones than to screw up and buy a fake, right? So, quick recap. Serial numbers are more pressed in, smushed in looking than these. These are just too clean, too bright, and too light looking. The binding goes over the ends of the frets on the neck. And then here at the bridge, these bridges here are always a little bit thicker. They're thicker than a regular Gibson bridge. A regular Gibson bridge is like, you know, it's just not this wide. And then your posts right here. These posts here, they look pretty close to the ABR one, but they got a little Allen hole in them. And while you can get the little Allen hole in aftermarket setups, and while they may have offered them, or, you know, here and there, generally speaking, a real Gibson of this time period or a real Gibson replica of this time period will have the posts that don't have any holes at all, and they also will not have any slots. And I will throw another guitar up here I have that's got the slotted screws. This one's got the little Allen head ones that go in there. I've got another one. The other two actually have the slots there. So that's another way to tell. Like I said, all this stuff could be changed, you know, and you might think, oh, well, that's different. It's a fake Gibson. But like I said, better to err on the side of caution and pass on a real one than to buy a fake. So, Again, there's a ton of ways to tell. I'm just kind of going over the basics here. If you really want to get into cracking these things open, I mean, they're all going to have a Switchcraft brand like switch in there and not whatever cheap generic one this one has. They'll have better electronics in there. The shielding will be different. You know, all that kind of, the shielding around the wires will be better. All that kind of stuff. Like I said, I'm not going to, get into all that right now. We're just kind of just doing a cursory examination here of how this thing came and what the quality is of how they look compared to a real one. So all right, let's recap. The serial number, the bridge, the binding over the frets, and for me, last but not least, is going to be, the truss rod. Now, a lot of people will tell you that not every single solitary Gibson came with the truss rod that has the nut on top. And that's true. But most of them did. And as I said before, you might see a guitar and maybe it's got a regular truss rod like one of these has, and I'll put a picture up of that, or we'll see it in the rest of the video. But you might find a guitar, say you found a Gibson and it was one of the ones that happened to have, a truss rod like one of these, which has got the Allen that you just put in there. Well, you'd pass on it and it'd be real. But that's better than, like I said, accidentally buying a fake. To my knowledge, and if anybody else out there knows any different, chime in please. But to my knowledge, none of these Chinese copies, and that's not to say that some other copy from someplace else at some other time period and some other point in history, okay? But these Chinese copies that have been floating around the last, 10 years or however long, to my knowledge, none of these have ever come with a truss rod like a real Gibson. So, if you crack one of these things open and you see that it has that Allen head thing instead of the actual nut on there, then you probably better pass on it, just to be safe. But like I said, there's no guarantees with some of this stuff, but those are just kind of the basics. Okay, well, once again, I just there's a lot more details you can go over on all of these things and all the different parts they've got on them. And we'll get into that a little more when I tear them down. But I just kind of wanted to go over that, just real super quick. Your best bet is, to check the bridge, to check the binding over the ends of the frets, and look at the truss rod. Still your best bang for the buck. Not always 100%, but the other thing too is you should never be buying anything like this without seeing it. And if you're going to spend that kind of money, have somebody that really knows what they're doing look at it, and don't ever buy anything like that online unless you absolutely know the seller, you've bought from them before, or it's a reputable business and this is what they do every day and they've got an awesome, return policy with feedback to show that. Just because like I said, even minus the whole Chibson thing, there's still plenty of clones and fakes, and they might not even have a guitar. They might just, send you a picture or video of something that they don't even own at this point in time. I mean, you got AI and everything else, so just it should really be kind of hands-on when you're looking for stuff like this to avoid getting scammed at all. So, all right, on to part 2.